Good evening. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization. Our mission is to encourage informed and active participation of citizens in government and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. We're pleased to be here at Stockton State College and to co-sponsor with New Jersey Network this public debate between the two major candidates for governor of our state, Governor Thomas Kean, Republican, and Essex County Executive Peter Shapiro, Democrat. I would now like to introduce Gloria Jones, past president of the League of Women Voters and this evening's moderator. She will explain the format and the rules of this debate. Gloria?
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, gentlemen. This evening's gubernatorial debate is going to be divided into 4 sections. At the beginning, we'll have introductory remarks by each of the candidates. They'll have 3 minutes for that. Then we will go to questions from a panel of media professionals. Following that, they will have an opportunity, the candidates that is, to question each other, and then we'll wrap it up with summations of 3 minutes apiece. We're going to keep a very careful watch on the time this evening, both for question answering and for question asking. So please keep alert to the signals being given to you by our timekeeper sitting in the front row. When they raise a blue card, it means you have 30 seconds left. A yellow card, 15. And when it's red, take a deep breath and finish your sentence. The order of speaking has been drawn by lots, and Republican candidate Governor Thomas H. Kean will speak first. Mr. Kean.
Thank you very much, and good evening. I'd like first of all to thank the League of Women Voters for sponsoring tonight's debate and sponsoring it in South Jersey. We've had a lot to talk about in this campaign. I've been talking about building pride in New Jersey, about creating jobs, about improving schools, about cleaning the environment, about the kind of shape this state was in 4 years ago before we started to turn things around, and my ideas of how New Jersey can really lead this country into the next century. Tonight I ask you to consider the entire record of what we've accomplished in just 4 short years. Just look at the record on issues that have traditionally been the centerpiece of past gubernatorial campaigns. Jobs. We've engineered a renaissance in New Jersey's economy, which has created 350,000 new jobs in this state, and we've cut at the same time the unemployment rate in half and made New Jersey one of the centers of high technology growth in this country. As far as education goes, this will always be my priority, and we've launched the most revolutionary program to improve the schools for our children in this country. We've raised standards, raised them for teachers, and raised them for students. We started a new program, the only state that's done so in America, to let talented people from all fields come into the classroom and interact with our children. And that program is working. After a decade of decline, our test scores are finally going the right direction. The scores of our children are going up. And on the environment, we've not only been cleaning up toxic waste, but we've pursued ocean dumping. We've made real progress on solid waste and added thousands of acres to our state parks. In crime, we've passed tough new laws. Tougher laws for crimes against older citizens. Laws to crack down on drunk driving. Tougher sentences for career criminals. And you know what? That crime rate, which had been going up, has turned around and has been going down for the last 3 years in a row. Criminals are going to jail, and our streets are safer. New Jersey's a changed place from 4 years ago. Frankly, it's a better place, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of our record. But can New Jersey be better still? You bet it can. And that's why I'm asking for another 4 years to build on that last 4 years' record. Thank you.
Thank you. With an opening statement now, we have Democratic candidate Essex County Executive, that always is a tongue twister for me, Peter Shapiro.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here in South Jersey. I wish we could have more debates, but unfortunately, due to my opponent's insistence on not debating, This will be the only debate you'll see in South Jersey, and in fact, the last debate of the campaign. I think it's unfortunate. But let me start off with this point if I can. Bruce Springsteen likes to say during the course of the concerts, which he's so fond of having here in New Jersey, if you say you're from New Jersey, that means you gotta take some responsibility for your state. Now, what I think this campaign is about is which candidate will do a better job in our future, taking responsibility for this state. Let me mention the issues which I think are of critical importance for our future, the ones which are really going to count and make a difference for us. We've got auto insurance rates in this state which are obscene. We have car insurance rates which simply are out of sight and make it so that many people simply can't afford the necessity of driving a car. I'm standing up for a plan which would cut those rates back by 25%, by standing up to the special interests, by saying that we could take them on and make it so that we could bring those obscenely high rates down to earth. I believe we could take on the incredible blight also, which is represented in this state by having the highest property taxes in the nation, something which not only is onerous and inequitable, but something which, frankly, results in a bad growth pattern for New Jersey, abandonment of our cities, congestion of our suburbs, eating up of our open spaces. We've got the opportunity now to do it. We could take that surplus generated by tax increases passed under this administration and cut back property taxes significantly now. But most important of all in taking some responsibility is this issue of toxic waste, of cleaning up our environment, of this terrible blight which hangs over us today. In this time of pride, it's probably our greatest source of shame. Time magazine had an article this past week, and in that article they showed a map of the United States. They had a little red dot for each one of those toxic waste sites. When it came to New Jersey, the whole state was covered in red. We've got 97 of the worst sites in America, that's by far the most, and we're the most densely populated state. We have yet to clean up a single one of those sites. We have yet to advance more than yet to advance 10% or more of those sites beyond the initial stage feasibility study. And it's caused not just numbers to occur, it's caused us to have one of the highest cancer rates in the country. Sit in the living room of somebody who lives near one of those sites and hear the fear in their voices. But it's not just there. It's going outside of the area immediately around one of those sites. And look at the fact that 1 out of every 6 of our water supply systems in this state today find traces of toxic chemicals in them. Look at the fact that in the whole central part of the state, just this past week, we had a toxic cloud emitted by one of the chemical plants there, something which made it so everyone there has to worry about how it affects their health. This election offers you a choice. And if anything that I'd like to ask the governor to join me in today, it's to make this race a referendum on who can do a better job with greater commitment on cleaning up those toxic waste sites.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. We move now into the panel questioning period of the evening. The candidates will be questioned alternately, and each candidate will have an opportunity to answer every question that's posed. The questioned candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and the other candidate will have 1 minute to rebut. Our panel this evening is Michael Aaron, who is the senior correspondent for New Jersey Network, Diane Allen, the senior news anchor for KYW-TV, Channel 3 in Philadelphia. That's in Philadelphia. She's from New Jersey. And Alan Miller, who is the state reporter for The Record. We will begin with Michael Aaron questioning Mr. Kean.
Governor, your television commercials say that you've cut more taxes than any governor in New Jersey history. That's true, but at the same time, state spending during your administration has risen from $5.7 billion to $9 billion. You sometimes say a lot of that has gone to offset local property tax increases, but during the past 4 years, property taxes have also risen from $4.2 billion to $5.2 billion. Under the circumstances, isn't it a bit deceptive to present yourself as a tax cutter?
Absolutely not. Not given the taxes we've cut already. We've, it doesn't matter where you start. We've cut the corporate net worth tax. In fact, we've abolished it totally. We've done the loss carry forward. We've done the inheritance tax cut so that people don't have that to worry about anymore. We've through the urban enterprise zones, we've had some sales tax cuts in the middle of cities. We've had to cut the federal surtax on unemployment insurance by paying back $600 million to the federal government. I signed an income tax bill. It's another $180 million. And That's $733 million there, and that's not even including the fact that we've got over $2 billion more now and going back to local communities in areas that usually were picked up by the property tax. So I'm proud of that. I like to cut taxes. I've proposed cutting them before. I've cut some already, and if the money is there in the future, I'll cut some more taxes, because that's what I enjoy doing. And we have taken. We've changed around the budget a bit. We've taken part of that surplus, and we've started to pay down our bond indebtedness for the first time in a long, long time. We've taken another part. We're using pay-as-you-go capital. We've got all sorts of money in that now, which instead of borrowing against from our children, now in the state, we go right out and we pay for something. We don't bond for prisons anymore. We've been building those prisons with pay-as-you-go capital. And the major increases in the budget have come. But they've come in areas of aid to local government. They've come in areas of paying for things that otherwise would have to go in that property tax. And no, we haven't ended the rise in the property tax, but we've cut it way, way back, the increase from the time at which Peter was in the legislature and Brendan Byrne was governor. And if we continue on this path, we will be able to cut back property taxes even further.
Thank you, Mr. Kean. Mr. Shapiro, would you care to rebut?
Yes. Have you seen your taxes go down under this governor? I sure haven't. I've seen my taxes go up, and go up considerably. You know, for every one of those list of things that he says, he's taken $1 out of our pockets for every dime in taxes he's cut. That's not a tax cut. That's a tax increase. You know, state spending under this administration has increased it faster than any other administration since World War II. 3 times the rate of inflation. When you compared it with any prior administration, Republican or Democratic, it's gone up more under this administration. Now remember, what did he promise when he ran for office? He promised he was going to cut our sales tax, a big tax, from 5 cents down to 4 cents. He raised it to 6 cents. He promised he would never increase the income tax, but he increased that too. You know, I wish there were a law that said politicians had to be held accountable for their campaign promises. You know, if Tom Kean were a TV set or a toaster, he'd be under investigation by the Division of Consumer Affairs. I think it's time we delivered what we promised.
Thank you. Diane Allen has the second question, and that will be addressed to Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Shapiro, state residents are excited when new industry, high-tech companies, and new jobs come to the state. But when they arrive, so it seems, do traffic jams and major congestion. And often the growth comes at the expense of our state farms. Sadly, farmers can make more money selling to developers. We're blacktopping the Garden State. How would you control the growth that this state is enjoying?
This is a critically important issue for our future, and it's one that's been completely ignored under this administration. You know, New Jersey is a state of such density that it's precious for us to preserve open space. It's critically important. We deal with the traffic congestion which we've got. And it's also very important for us to do something to make it so our cities come back. All those things relate to each other. You know, our cities lag further behind the rest of our state than the cities of any other state in the nation. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can do far better on that. Look at what other states, don't look at New York and Pennsylvania for a change where they've got huge cities which dwarf ours. Look up in Massachusetts where they don't have a sick city. Or look in Connecticut and see what a good job they've done there. Go down to Baltimore and take a look at how they've turned around a city like that. Now, how could we deal with this issue of growth better? One of the things we've got to do is try to make it so that we have a good balance in terms of our growth. And part of that means we've got to start to have a regional approach towards growth. This is something that I part company with my governor on quite a bit. And I'll tell you, one thing I think we need to do is make it so that we don't sacrifice everything on an altar of home rule. Home rule has its benefits. It has a sense of intimacy and a good sense of participation, but it also has its bad side of parochialism. And what we've got to try to do is build regional mechanisms for handling the growth of this state, bringing together people on a region-by-region basis with the state standing behind it, and making it so that we can have a decent growth plan for every region of this state. If I'm elected governor, we're going to have a plan for New Jersey 2000 in every region of this state. It's going to be devised by the people of this state, and it's going to be something which will make it so that we can control the congestion, deal with our need to preserve our open spaces, and make it so that we can bring those cities back to life. There could be no more critical problem for dealing with the question of what we're going to look like in our future.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Mr. Kean, would you care to rebut?
Well, I couldn't agree more about cities. And we've had a program, as you know, that's been geared absolutely to trying to bring cities back. And you talk to those urban mayors, I don't think any of them are Republicans. In fact, some of them are working on Peter's campaign. But you find me one who says that we have not concentrated on working to help those cities. It's going to be difficult to do because we have, whether it's through urban enterprise zones or particular transportation centers or the Urban Development Corporation or any number of other ways. And there is already a mechanism for bringing this state planning under control. It's called a statewide planning council. We worked it out as a bipartisan bill, and it got blocked in the Democratic Assembly. I don't know whether you can shake it loose or not, but we haven't been able to shake it loose so far. If we can get that kind of a mechanism going, then maybe we can have that planning that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Alan Miller, State Reporter for the Record, will ask the third question, and it will be addressed to Mr. Kean. Mr.
Governor,
Miller?
you speak a great deal about improving government management and efficiency. Yet during your administration, the State Division of Motor Vehicles has been beset by one major problem after another. From a concealed no-bid contract to a bungled computer system to fading registration stickers. My question has two parts. First, don't you ultimately bear some of the responsibility for this mismanagement? And second, given these problems, why haven't you brought in a top-notch professional to try to clean up this agency?
You know, one of the tragedies of this particular motor vehicle department is they're the first one in a number of years that tried to do the right thing. They recognized the fact that that agency hadn't been running well for not just 4 years or 8 years or 10 years, but probably as 20 or 25 years. It hadn't been given the kind of service to the people of the state that they really deserved. They decided that they would do something different. They tried, instead of doing everything by hand, to do things by computer. Well, they picked their own consultant, no question about it, and people know what happened there. It wasn't a happy story, other than the fact it's being corrected now. It'll be back shortly to running as it was before, and a few months from now it'll be running better than it ever was until we get the computer system online totally, and then it'll be running much, much better than it was before. But the tragedy is they were the first people to try. Now, I recognize the fact that the Motor Vehicle Agency is a difficult agency to run, but it doesn't mean we can't do it. It doesn't mean we can't make the Motor Vehicle Agency the very best agency of its kind in the country. We've already made a commitment to take it out of politics. We've already made a commitment to reorganize it in whatever way is necessary. And believe me, the division of motor vehicles will be a priority. And the division of motor vehicles is something, if I'm successful in office, that I am going to make my personal priority, because I've been just as frustrated as other people have been by a number of the problems. And it will have, from this point on, my personal attention.
Thank you, sir. Would you care to rebut, Mr.
Sure, I'm not going to resist the opportunity. Governor Kean is great at taking the credit for a lot of things, but not very good at taking the blame for it. And here's a case of a state agency which deals arguably with more adult citizens of the state than any other state enterprise that goes on, where they've completely blown it, and he's blaming it on a consultant. Frankly, one of the most important rules you got to remember when you set up a new computer system is to run it in parallel. That you make sure you run it in parallel with the old system. This system that he's set up has not just inconvenienced citizens, it's cost us $150,000 a month in overtime. It's made it so that people, including myself, had to drive their vehicles without their registration for a couple months before it came back in the mail. Now, he takes credit for a lot of things that he didn't do. For example, he took credit earlier for the inheritance tax cutback. You know, he vetoed that the first time round. It didn't help it get through the legislature one bit. That was something that was fought for by Assemblyman Doyle. And when he finally got it through with so much pressure, they did approve it. There are other things like that where you can see him taking credit.
We'll move on now to Michael Aaron from New Jersey Network, who will ask the fourth question of Mr. Kean.
Of Mr. Kean or of Mr. Shapiro?
I beg your pardon, it is Mr. Shapiro.
Okay. Mr. Shapiro, there are about 65 or 70,000 state employees, many of whom are probably watching this evening. In Essex County, you cut the county workforce from 8,200 to 6,400 employees, a cut of 22%. You're quite proud of it, but it has not endeared you to the public employee unions in Essex County, and it probably cost you the endorsement of the state public employee union. What guarantee, what reassurance can you give to the 65, 70,000 state employees that they won't suffer the same fate?
I'll tell you, I believe that one of the things that particularly Democrats like myself have to do, and that is those people who care about government and want to see an activist government that's performing services effectively, is that we've got to be willing to take on the bureaucracy to make it work better. That's something I've done in Essex County repeatedly. We shrunk that workforce. As you correctly put it, actually it was a little bit different from that. It wasn't from 8,200, it was from 8,300, all the way down to about 6,447 employees where it stands right now. Not, by the way, including seat employees, as was incorrectly stated at one previous time. That's a big shrinkage in the bureaucracy, better than 20%. But we tried to do it in a humane way, in a way which would make it so that we could do it through attrition rather than through layoffs. So we've tried to minimize layoffs wherever that was possible. And where layoffs have gone on, what we've tried to do is make it so that those people who were laid off were part of an Operation Layoff Recovery, so that they could come back into the first position which came back open anywhere else in the government. We've tried to retrain employees for other positions, and that's worked to a great extent. Now that contrasts very sharply with my opponent's record. He ran for office saying he was going to cut the state workforce by 10%, 7,500 employees. Well, you know, in his last 4 years, it's gone up by better than 10%. 7,600 employees are now in addition on the state payroll. Now, employees, it's important we treat them fairly. It's important we make them feel part of the system. But frankly, government is there first and foremost for the people it's serving and for its taxpayers. And those are my two highest single priorities in the way I set up a government. I believe that we can make our government better managed. I believe we can streamline it. And that's one of the reasons why I've taken on that battle, even though it may cost me a vote here or there, as you mentioned, among some of the employee organizations who have endorsed Governor Kean.
Thank you. Your rebuttal, Mr. Kean?
Well, first of all, when I came into office, we brought in, as you remember, a team from the private sector who went in, 200 good people who went into every department and reorganized every department totally. And we cut out 400 or 500 cars that were unnecessary. We cut a number of other things, and we had to have a few layoffs too in those days, just in order to make things more efficient and tighter. And there's an increase, but the increase is almost entirely in the Department of Corrections because everybody had neglected the prison system, and we had to build some new prisons to put the people who were convicted in. And at that point, after we've done that, we had to have the guards to man them. That's almost the whole increase. Other than that, we've held things very tight. And there are departments like education where there are 200 or 300 fewer employees than there were when I took office. We've cut the bureaucracy at every level, and where we found people sitting behind desks, we've often put them in the field where they could actually work with people, where they could actually help people, such as the Division of Youth and Family Services, which we have increased the number of caseworkers, but we've taken them out of the offices and taken them from behind the desks and put them into the neighborhoods.
Ms. Allen, your question for Mr. Kean, please.
Mr. Kean, last month you signed a bill that sets a minimum salary for public school teachers of $18,500, and the state has agreed to subsidize the salary of new teachers for 3 years. But who pays then? And what about the teachers already on the payroll who are making less than $18,500? Is the long-range cost affordable for the communities who might have to raise taxes to pay these higher salaries? And perhaps most importantly, what would you say to the taxpayers who claim they just can't afford any more taxes?
Well, first of all, the $18,500 salary covers all teachers who are making below that, so that nobody is going to be making below that in the state of New Jersey. And it was done for a very, very good reason, that as teachers negotiated, negotiating committees, they would negotiate the middle range and the top range because that's who the negotiating committees were made of. And that lower range was neglected. And the result is when people from colleges looked at professions and they found the entry salary so low, we were attracting the bottom half of the class, or the bottom quarter of the class in many cases, instead of the top half or the top quarter into the teaching profession. We've funded that totally at the state level for 3 years until the Feldman Commission, which is a commission to studying taxes and spending, actually takes over and brings up their report. They will be the ones to tell us how to fund it further if it needs funding, because a lot of the salaries would have normally been up to that range anyway. We have also been increasing funding for education at the state level at a very rapid rate. We have increased funding for schools over $750 million, more than $750 million since I've been governor. And I'd like to keep up that funding level because to me, nothing is more important than our schools. Nothing is more important than our children. And so that has been my priority. It will be my priority. And if we continue to increase funding at that kind of level, if we're able again to fully fund the education aid formula, there will be funds there. not only to fund this particular increase, but we hope to give some other increases up the line, because we just simply have to pay teachers adequately if we're going to keep them in the schools and not have them going into other professions or going into administration or something else. That's a priority that I'm willing to spend money for.
Thank you, sir. Your reply, Mr. Shapiro?
Yes, you know, teachers are underpaid in this state. There's no question we should be improving teacher salaries. But this is just a perfect example of one of those kind of approaches which the state too often takes, which is completely ignoring the implications for property taxes. You know, the state puts a new requirement on there that's going to cost that costs them, by the way, $38 million, and they fund that part of it, but they forget about what's called the ripple effect. The ripple effect on all the other teachers in the system. They're going to obviously insist on higher pay, and that's going on right now in school systems like Patterson and others around the state. The ripple effect is not $38 million. It's been estimated as high as more than $300 million in new property taxes. I've got a better approach, an approach which I think would work much more consistently, not the cookie-cutter approach towards education, which they use too often in the state of more and more mandates, but instead, let's set up a teacher's endowment for improving teacher salaries and let every school district have a piece of it and figure out how they want to shape a system for improving teacher salaries. And let's get those salaries up, not just for starters, but across the board.
Shapiro. Mr. Allen now has the next question, and it will be addressed to Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Shapiro, you are the chief executive of a county with some of the most troubled cities in a state that may have the most serious urban problems in the nation. Yet why is it that your campaign hasn't focused more on addressing the urban needs of jobs, housing, and transportation?
You ask a very important question, and I think a very significant one. I have tried throughout this campaign to try to talk in specific about the needs of our cities. And I think it's something which is critically important for us to be addressing for the future of our state. It's not just, by the way, the reality of what those cities are like today. It's also the fact that we live in one state, and all of our fates are interconnected. You know, when we've got suburban congestion, in good part it's caused by the flight of businesses from our cities and the fact that we're doing nothing of a significant nature to try to bring back business to those cities. Let me tell you what my approach towards the problems of our cities would consist of. A few of the things which I think are very important to do it. I would like to see us target some of the resources that we're spending today on bringing new business to this state, and not just target it so grandly as putting the governor on TV with Brooke Shields. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm a little jealous myself. I'd love to be on TV with Brooke Shields. But frankly, sometimes I think the only economic effect it really has is to bring people into the Princeton Valley where they hope they might get a better view of her. I would like to see us instead take that money and target it towards getting investment in those areas where we need it, like our cities. I'd like to see us do something with the infrastructure in our urban areas. Go into the city of Newark today, for example, and take a look, for example, at the roads which the county runs, which I'm responsible for, which I'll tell you won't find a pothole in. We maintain them very carefully. And take a look down the main road that the state runs that goes through the heart of that city, Route 21, McCarter Highway. You can't go the speed limit on McCarter Highway without risking bending your chassis. You can't find, by the way, where the sewer lines run in a lot of that city because they're so old. We've got to deal with that infrastructure problem. But probably most important of all, we've got to have an approach which gets back to the community. You know, a lot of what we've done in cities historically has been to build a big, sexy project downtown and hope it would deal with some of the problems in the neighborhoods. But it hasn't. We've got to try to get investment back down to the neighborhoods, to community businesses, to small businesses, to grassroots efforts, to co-ops, and the like.
Thank you. Mr. Kean, your rebuttal?
First of all, there's a lot of that going on. We already have an agency that does that. EDA targets right into cities. That is their priority. They've also done an awful lot in cities, particularly with small businesses. And if you want to look at the city of Patterson and see the difference today where there isn't a store in downtown Patterson that's vacant, if you want to look at Camden and look at the waterfront development plans or the new transportation center that we got, or if you want to go to Newark and see the new buildings that I just broke ground for, or the new gateway plans, or any number of things there, you'll see some exciting things happening in our cities. There isn't a city that we're not building in and building around, and we're targeting through urban enterprise zones, we're targeting small business, we're targeting minority business, and we're going to continue to do that because the heart of our recovery, what people forget, the heart of our recovery is not Johnson & Johnson and not great big companies. The heart of our recovery is small businesses. And if those cities don't recover permanently with the rest of us, then I happen to believe the long-range recovery in this whole state is jeopardized.
Thank you. The next question will be from Mr. Aaron, and it will be addressed to Mr. Kean.
Governor, my question is about style of leadership. You said recently that you signed the Chemical Right to Know bill because you've been a conservationist all your life and because it was the right thing to do, and that you signed the South Africa divestment bill because it was morally the right thing to do. And yet those bills sat on your desk for months and the public didn't know where you stood on those issues. It was the suspense of Trenton. Will he or won't he sign those bills? If you felt so deeply about those issues, why didn't the public know where you stood on issues that others had been fighting for several months?
What I think you should understand, or people ought to understand, is that the governor is the last word. Once the governor signs a bill, that is the law. And that's the difference between being governor and a legislator, for instance, where there's always a second chance. When I get a proposal and I sign that bill, every word has consequence. So I meet, when it's a particularly controversial bill, I allow people from both sides to come into my office. And on both the two bills you mentioned, and there are a couple of others, I've done the same thing. I have brought the proponents, I've brought the opponents, and I've brought them into the office and I've sat them down and said, take your best shot. Tell me why you think I ought to do this, or if I'm planning to sign it, I say, tell me why I shouldn't sign it. And from that, I get some ideas. Now, as you know, the governor has a number of alternatives. He can either sign a bill, he can veto a bill, or he may say, that's the right bill, and I'm going to approach it by signing it, but I want a couple of changes in it. And the two bills you mentioned, I thought at one time we did need a couple of changes in it. It turned out that in both cases I thought it was better not to send them back to the legislature because I wasn't sure what would happen, what their fate would be if we did. But that's the responsibility I have, and I've always figured it was much better before putting my signature on a particular bill or on a particular proposal to get those opinions and get those sides, and no side on those particular debates or a number of other issues feel they were denied access to the governor. They came in and they gave it their best shot, and in both cases I felt that the right to know was absolutely important for the people of the state, and I signed the bill, and I happen to believe this state also ought to have led the country in divesting, and it did lead the country, and I'm proud of my signature on that bill also.
Thank you. Your reply, Mr. Shapiro?
Gee whiz, this last word stuff is the biggest bunch of malarkey I've ever heard. And I'll tell you why. The governor plays a critical role that he should be leading opinion and should be fighting for the things he believes in. He should be an assertive leader, somebody who creates the momentum behind things that happen in this state. You know, that right to know bill was the most important piece of environmental legislation to go through the legislature in these past 4 years. It received no initiative, no push whatsoever from the governor's office. They lay back there silently while Democrats in the legislature pushed it through with Republican opposition. The divestiture bill, to express our outrage at what's going on in South Africa, went through the legislature. He was so dead silent that out of 120 members, only 3 Republicans voted for the bill. That's the style of leadership that we've got today. Not only that, it's just not good for relationships with the legislature. It means that you don't get involved with trying to craft the bill as it's going through the process, and it means, frankly, you pull the rug out from under the members of your own party, and that's what's happened too often.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Ms. Allen, you have the next question, and it's to be addressed to Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you. Mr. Shapiro, the fear of AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is growing. The disease is spreading, and we know there's no cure. How should the state combat this problem? Is there a role the state can play? Should we look at whether or not public schools should admit children that have AIDS? How do we deal with prostitutes that have AIDS? One assemblyman is trying to face these problems. He's putting in a bill that would make it a crime for anyone who knows that he or she has AIDS to have sexual contact with another person. Would you support that? And in general, how should New Jersey respond to AIDS?
Gee whiz, you ask a lot of questions there on a very, very complex subject, and the folks in the audience, I don't think there's anything funny about this subject. It's a terribly deadly kind of disease. It's really a tragedy. I'll tell you, a lot of this, frankly, is out of New Jersey's hands. The critical research effort that has to go on this disease, which I think is proceeding fairly well, has to go on the federal level through groups like the Centers for Disease Control. And I would support putting further appropriations behind that effort, because this is such a serious matter as that. What's the state's role, though? Well, one of the things the state shouldn't do is wait till the school year starts before coming out with a policy on what they're going to do with children who have AIDS in the school system. This administration dawdled and didn't come out with a policy on that until October. There was a lot of time before that to come out with it, and it made it so that, frankly, there was unnecessary controversy that probably could have been avoided. That would have made a whole lot more sense. We could do a lot better in getting information out to people. There's a legitimate role that I think our state government could play to make it so that some of the hysteria about this disease is calmed down a little bit so that people understand how it's transmitted and don't go around with the sense that they could be getting it from the slightest, most incidental contact. It's important for us to be educating people about the real risks and not about the false ones that are involved in it. It's important for us to, in a sense, lower the level lower the volume of the discussion so that we can increase people's awareness of what a serious issue this is. It faces all of the people who could potentially be exposed to it in the state. It could be our biggest single health problem.
Thank you. Mr. Kean, your reply?
I don't think there's any question that the state has an informational role. We also have a research role. We put some money into research through some of our good medical schools. That's also very, very important. But it seems to me that we do have some decisions to make in this area, and that we have to be very careful that those decisions are made on the best medical advice. Those decisions are not ones which should be made by people in the political arena. They should be made by people in the health arena, and in the case of schools, in concert with people in the educational arena. That's how those decisions ought to be made, and once made, as they have been in this state, I back them fully.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Mr. Miller, and it should be addressed to Mr. Kean.
Governor, just today, more allegations were made concerning state contracts worth millions of dollars that have gone to a small number of firms on a no-bid basis, firms that have contributed tens of thousands of dollars to Republican coffers. Do you acknowledge that there may have been any excesses or overzealousness in Republican fundraising? And if you're reelected, will you do anything to reassess or curtail Republican fundraising efforts?
I don't know of curtailing fundraising efforts. I don't know of any case where those particular problems have connected fundraising and government activities in the state, in Essex County, or in a number of other places. If there is evidence, if there is hard evidence that is not only totally against the policy of the administration, but I would take immediate action to see that connection was severed. We have an obligation here, and that obligation is to run government efficiently and run it honestly and do things on merit. And that is the way this administration has proceeded. It's the way it will proceed in the future, and it's the way I will certainly proceed if I'm reelected.
Thank you. Mr. Shapiro, your reply?
I think this is a much more serious problem than the governor gives it credit for. I think there's a significant problem that has to be changed, and you can see the signs of it basically in all sorts of things that have turned up. I think if we scratched a little bit deeper, we'd probably even find more. We all know about the Price Waterhouse contract with $35,000 contribution to the governor's ball. That's something, by the way, that broke their longstanding policy of never giving to any political cause. They broke it in part, I believe, because they were solicited very heavily after getting a $6.5 million contract. Bear Stearns, $40,000. They got so much business, they had to open up a Trenton office. But worse yet, look at the polluters that have given. They solicited money from Ciba-Geigy, one of the biggest polluters that exists in this state, a Swiss firm dumping millions of gallons of sewage, chemical waste into the ocean. They solicited firms from CPS, one of the sites that's on that list of 97 Superfund sites. We've got to change those laws and make it so that we don't allow a giant truck to be driven through the loophole in the law that limited contributions.
This will be our last question of the evening now. It will be addressed by Mr. Aaron to Mr. Shapiro.
Mr. Shapiro, the question is about home rule again. Your position on it seems either inconsistent or schizophrenic. On education, you call for more local control and fewer state mandates like the $18,500 minimum salary. On issues like regional planning, garbage, Mount Laurel, you attack the governor for not fashioning solutions that he would impose on local communities. Where do you stand on balance? We need more home rule or less home rule?
Let me try to see if I can clarify it for you, because I can understand where your confusion would come from on this, because You know, within a 2-minute context, it's hard to give a very detailed answer on this. If you look at the issue of zoning and planning in this state, the boring terms that we use to describe how we're going to figure out how we're going to grow in the future, what you see pretty clearly when you take a look at it is the fact that that it's been done basically as a closed shop. Too often it's been in the hands of judges, of lawyers who are specialists in that area, and of real estate speculators. My plan is to try to make it so that it's less parochial, that people don't just look at the future of one little town, but look at the way in which it works within an entire region. And at the same time, that what we try to do is make it so that we have a greater degree of participation. I want to actively encourage citizen participation directly in planning for New Jersey's future. That's why the idea behind this plan is to get each region in the state to try to work together as a kind of regional forum to make it so that they could come up with a New Jersey 2000 plan. A plan that would say how we're going to grow in the future, how we're going to make it compatible, so that we don't have one town deciding on one thing, which is completely incompatible with another town on its borders. Too often that's happened in the past. And what happens increasingly is that judges step in and take away the decision-making in the most undemocratic, least participatory way that's possible to have it. I don't think it's smart to have one judge-driven policy towards growth in the state, or to have 567 policies which basically are driven by the municipal desire, and it's a very real desire, to try to balance next year's budget without increasing property taxes. Property taxes in this state are so high that we need a major move to cut them back. My policy for a 15% cutback based on the surplus would do just that. But part of it has to be to make it so that we start to plan together for our future. That is participatory. That's not taking it out of people's hands. But that's recognizing that the institutions that we have right now just aren't working that well.
Thank you. Your reply, Mr. Kean?
Yeah, first of all, let me correct something, because you talked about the Republican Party, not me, but the Republican Party taking contributions from toxic waste dumpers. Well, if you looked at the records, which you must have, you wouldn't have that. You know that those contributions were returned. And since you know they're returned, you shouldn't make those kind of charges, because they're not true. But now let me go on to the question. Regional is very important. Regional working together. But you didn't answer the question on your inconsistencies, because you have been inconsistent. You went into Middlesex County, for instance, and said, well, we shouldn't have out-of-county dumping. Then you go into other areas and ask for a regional solution. By the way, the out-of-county dumping was particularly uncharacteristic, considering that Essex County is now the largest out-of-county dumper in the state. But this has got to be consistent. We can have regional planning with home rule. Not only can we have it, but we've got to.
Thank you. That concludes this portion of the program. Now we're going to move into the candidates' questioning of each other. The question may be 30 seconds, the response 2 minutes, and then the questioner may rebut for 1 minute. Now, they have drawn by lots who would be the first to question, and Mr. Shapiro will ask the first and only question. There will be just one question that each gets to ask the other. Mr. Shapiro.
I thought it was the other way around.
I'm sorry, that was the information given to me.
Did you think it was the other way around, too?
No, I thought you asked the first question.
Okay,
and gave the first
I'll go ahead. I'm prepared. I'm confused. You know, in the last debate, Governor Kean, I went down the issue of some of the cleanups that you claim that you've done in the state on toxic waste. For example, where you said that one drum was taken off a beach and called that a toxic waste cleanup, or that floors were cleaned up of minor stains at a site and you called that a toxic waste cleanup. I'm reading from your reports. Or floors and walls and ceilings were cleaned before a building was sold and called that a toxic waste cleanup. You started running a TV ad after I made those attacks, and you said that there were 3 sites. You showed them in your TV ad that had been cleaned up. Well, I've been to those sites. They're not clean. I'd like you to go and look at those sites with me and see where in one of those sites, after you were sued, they moved the barrels that were there to another place that's now a toxic waste site. Will you go with me? Will you go with me? And I'm sorry. My question is, will you go with me and take a look at those sites?
Peter, that's the difference between being a candidate and being governor. You can stand on sites and make irresponsible charges, and I've got to have the responsibility of seeing those sites clean. Now, the ones you mentioned, but North Bergen site, which was in that commercial, 189 gallons have been removed, 2,400 gallons of liquid waste, 51,000 pounds of solid waste, and 117 cubic yards of soil. and they've been disposed at disposal sites that are licensed by the federal government. Signo Trading in Newark, which I think is the one you mentioned and you claim was taken someplace else. It's a result of a fire. It was discovered after a fire in Newark in 1983. The company itself was ordered to start the cleanup. They started moving some of the waste to another area in Somerville. The DEP was not satisfied with that. They sued the company to take over the cleanup. They did. Since they have taken over the cleanup, 444 containers ranging in size from 1 ounce to 85 gallons have been removed and sent to federally licensed sites. Those sites, most of them, by the way, the largest site is not in New Jersey, it's in Ohio. And Somerville, where they did send some of the original materials, we have gotten the most dangerous materials out of that site. And if you go in, you'd see the others are now scheduled for removal. The DEP has done a good job at all 3 of those sites. In Syncon Resins, which I think is the third, in Kearney, 24 drums were removed. Many contained volatile substances, by the way, and that was a difficult cleanup. All those materials were also taken to federally licensed disposal. That feasibility study after the cleanup is going on right now, and it's one of the largest drum removal sites in the entire country. And tell you, DEP has done a good job, and I'll tell you, those people who have to put on protective equipment, go into those sites every day, and then have to take blood tests every 6 months for their work, don't appreciate all of your comments.
Thank you. We will now have 1 minute for Mr. Shapiro to reply to this answer.
Let me, if I can, tell you the truth about a few of those sites and make it so that you understand what's going on there. Governor Kean, as you heard, didn't answer my question if he would go there to take a look at them with me, because frankly, if you went there with me, you'd see that they're not cleaned up. Let me tell you about just one of those sites that he mentioned, Signo Trading. This was a site where there was a fire in 1983, where in fact the citizens had to sue repeatedly to get the state to take any action. The state supervised the cleanup by what they call the responsible party, that is the owner of the site, and right under their noses, they transferred barrel after barrel illegally to another location where they've now created, in turn, a second toxic waste site out in Somerville. It's just simply a disgraceful thing when you stop and look at it. It's a disgraceful thing that when you look at it, these cancer-causing sites, which are hurting people's lives, not just near them, but all throughout New Jersey, are not getting cleaned up today. It's something that we need to be so much more aggressive about. And when Governor Kean says, Peter, you don't understand, the bureaucracy is slow, and you've got to be satisfied with it, frankly, I don't buy that argument. I've spent my career fighting against bureaucratic dilly-dallying just like that, and I'm going to do it as governor.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is cutting into the time that your candidates have to speak. I would appreciate it if you would not applaud. Mr. Kean, it's your opportunity to ask the question now.
I don't have any further questions of Peter.
You have no further questions. Then we will move into closing remarks. And
Gee whiz, does that mean I get a second one?
Nope.
No.
And Mr. Kean will speak first for closing remarks.
You know, we've heard a debate on a variety of issues tonight, toxic waste, taxes, a number of other questions, and we had a chance, I hope, to air our differences. But there's one issue which I don't think we really did debate and perhaps didn't get into enough, and that was South Jersey and the renaissance that I think is capable of happening here in South Jersey. For years, this part of the state was ignored by Trenton. In the last 4 years, that's changed as part of a policy toward the entire state. We brought jobs here to South Jersey. We've opened an office in South Jersey to hear the views of its residents. We've appointed South Jersey people for the first time to key positions throughout government. And we've built long-promised roads, things like Route 55 and the Longport Summers Bridge, things that politicians had promised for many, many years are finally now happening. And we've helped the New Jersey farmers with a Jersey Fresh campaign. We've made a special effort to work at South Jersey cities like Camden and Bridgeton and Atlantic City. And there is a new pride growing, a new pride in the South and a new pride throughout the state, but particularly evident here. And that's why I think the Vineland Times-Journal wrote that, unlike its predecessor, this governor seems to realize the state should invest in South Jersey's rich potential and can get a reward. Why? The reason is very simple. A state is no less than the citizenry, and therefore the state should also have a dream. More than just the projects of today, I think we should have a vision for tomorrow. More than just a job at hand, we have to have a job for generations ahead. That's what it's all about. You know, when I was teaching school, I used to tell a story to my students to illustrate a couple of points. There was a story about 3 stonemasons who were working back at the time of the Middle Ages, and they were working, and an individual came by and questioned all 3 of them. And he questioned the first stonemason and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm laying bricks." And he went on to the second stonemason and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm laying bricks, and they're part of a wall." And he went on to the third stonemason. And the third stonemason was working a little faster and with a little more pride, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm laying bricks and building a wall, and that wall is part of a cathedral. And that cathedral is going to be here for people to admire for generations to come." Well, you see, I think what we can do in New Jersey is build that cathedral. I think we have the potential here. And what we've done so far, we have built the foundation. And I'll tell you, I'm a carpenter who's been working on that foundation, and what I'm really asking the people of New Jersey for is permission to continue on the rest of the structure, and permission, in a sense, to complete the dream.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Shapiro, your summation?
Thank you very much, and thank you for listening. It's been a great opportunity to be able to debate the issues again. I'll tell you, I think the best thing we could do for the people of South Jersey, frankly, Governor, is to make it so that we have more of these debates, but unfortunately that's considered to be taboo in your campaign. I think that's a disservice to people, not just of South Jersey, but all over this state. I'll tell you, I've got a very different vision of government than you have, I think. It's a vision of government which can be creative, a vision of government which can be activist, a vision of government which could really work far more effectively on the challenges that we face today, the ones that are big in our future. Let me go over those again, the ones that I think are very significant. We've got different approaches to all of them. On property taxes, your approach has been basically to ignore it, to make it so property taxes continue to go up and up. We have become, under your term in office, the highest property tax state in the nation. My approach is to take that big surplus you're sitting on, that you generated by increasing the sales tax and the income tax, and turn it back to the people with a 15% tax cut. On auto insurance, my approach is one to make top to bottom reforms on it, to take on every one of those special interests that's benefited from that system. Not to pick on one against the other or take sides in any way, but to say to the insurance companies and the auto body shops and the healthcare professionals and the attorneys, and to say to all of them that we're going to ask you to trim back a little bit so we could all save 25% off those auto insurance premiums. That would be a blessing. Your approach is basically tepid reforms which have yielded at most a $33 savings to people. Just simply not good enough. Last and not least, last and most importantly of all, my approach towards toxic waste as opposed towards your approach. I would like to see us have an emergency agency with special powers to launch a crash program to clean up these toxic waste sites. You'd like to run it like the Division of Motor Vehicles, the same slow, plodding way that it's been in the past. I'd like to see us put in place a long-range funding system, and I've outlined that. You've refused to do that. I'd like to see us have a preventive approach to make it so that toxic waste doesn't continue to build up in our environment in such a revolting way. You know, Bruce Springsteen has a song where he says, "You can't start a fire without a spark." I think this state needs a spark, and as governor, I hope to be that spark. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to thank both of the candidates for their concise presentations of their positions, and thank the panel for their astute questioning, and thank the League production staff for its perseverance. I would like to remind you that Tuesday, November the 5th is Election Day from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. And we're going to do more than elect a governor. We're going to address bond issues, public questions. We're going to elect a General Assembly. There are people on the county and municipal level that need electing as well. If you can't make it to the poll, remember there is a way to vote by absentee ballot. You must mail your application into your county clerk, and he or she must receive it by next Tuesday. That's the 29th. Now, if you can't do it that way, you may walk into your county clerk's office anytime before 3 o'clock the day before the election and fill out a form right there on the spot. It's easy to vote in New Jersey, so if you're registered, vote. If you're not, sign up for next time. Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're all wired up. Thank you, dear.